Venezuela's story is a warning about relying too much on one resource without planning for the future. Venezuela, the rise and fall of a petrostate. Written by Diana Roy and Amelia Cheatham, July 2024. Venezuela, home to the world's largest oil reserves, is a case study in the perils of becoming a petrostate. Since it was discovered in the country in the 1920s, oil has taken Venezuela on an exhilarating but dangerous boom and bust ride that offers lessons for other resource-rich states. Decades of poor governance have driven what was once one of Latin America's most prosperous countries to economic and political ruin. In recent years, Venezuela has suffered economic collapse, with output shrinking significantly and rampant hyperinflation contributing to a scarcity of basic goods, such as food and medicine. Meanwhile, government mismanagement and U.S. sanctions have led to a drastic decline in oil production and severe underinvestment in the sector. Though Washington eased some sanctions on Venezuela's oil and gas sector in 2023, signaling a potential détente, Caracas's failure to meet conditions for a fair election prompted the U.S. government to reimpose sanctions in 2024. What is a petrostate? Petrostate is an informal term used to describe a country with several interrelated attributes. Government income is deeply reliant on the export of oil and natural gas. Economic and political power are highly concentrated in an elite minority, and political institutions are weak and unaccountable, and corruption is widespread. Countries often described as petrostates include Algeria, Cameroon, Chad, Ecuador, Indonesia, Iran, Kazakhstan, Libya, Mexico, Nigeria, Oman, Qatar, Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Venezuela. What's behind the petrostate paradigm? Petrostates are thought to be vulnerable to what economists call Dutch disease, a term coined during the 1970s after the Netherlands discovered natural gas in the North Sea. In an afflicted country, a resource boom attracts large inflows of foreign capital, which leads to an appreciation of the local currency and a boost for imports that are now comparatively cheaper. This sucks labor and capital away from other sectors of the economy, such as agriculture and manufacturing, which economists say are more important for growth and competitiveness. As these labor-intensive export industries lag, unemployment could rise, and the country could develop an unhealthy dependence on the export of natural resources. In extreme cases, a petrostate forgoes local oil production and instead derives most of its oil wealth through high taxes on foreign drillers. Petrostate economies are then left highly vulnerable to unpredictable swings in global energy prices and capital flight. The so-called resource curse also takes a toll on governance. Since petrostates depend more on export income and less on taxes, there are often weak ties between the government and its citizens. Timing of the resource boom can exacerbate the problem. Most petrostates became dependent on petroleum while, or immediately after, they were establishing a democracy, state institutions, an independent civil service and private sector, and rule of law, says Terry Lynn Carl, a professor of political science at Stanford University and author of The Paradox of Plenty, a seminal book on the dynamics of petrostates. Leaders can use the country's resource wealth to repress or co-opt political opposition. How does Venezuela fit the category? Venezuela is the archetype of a failed petrostate, experts say. Oil continues to play the dominant role in the country's fortunes, more than a century after it was discovered there. The oil price plunged from more than $100 per barrel in 2014 to under $30 per barrel in early 2016 sent Venezuela into an economic and political spiral, and despite rising prices since then, conditions remain bleak. A number of grim indicators tell the story. Oil dependence. In recent years, oil exports have financed almost two-thirds of the government's budget. Estimates for 2024 place this figure slightly lower at 58%. Falling production. Starved of adequate investment and maintenance, oil output has continued to generally decline, hitting its lowest level in decades. However, exports increased by some 12% in 2023, due in part to an easing of U.S. sanctions on the country's oil and gas sector. Turbulent economy. Venezuela's gross domestic product, GDP, shrank by roughly three-quarters PDF between 2014 and 2021. However, the economy grew by 5% in 2023, and the government forecasts it will reach 8% in 2024. Soaring debt. Venezuela has an estimated debt burden of $150 billion or higher. Hyperinflation. Annual inflation skyrocketed to just over 130,000% in 2018, and though it has since slowed, it remained at 190% in 2023, according to the central bank. Growing autocracy. Over the last decade, President Nicolas Maduro and his allies have violated basic tenets of democracy to maintain power. This includes restricting internet access and arbitrarily prosecuting and detaining political opponents and critics. These issues, coupled with international sanctions and the ongoing repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic, have fueled a devastating humanitarian crisis, with severe shortages of basic goods such as food, drinking water, gasoline, and medical supplies. According to a November 2022 survey, 50% of Venezuela's 28 million residents live in poverty, though that is down from 65% the year before. Since 2014, nearly 8 million Venezuelan refugees have fled to neighboring countries and beyond, where some governments have granted them temporary residency. Venezuela's Ministry of Foreign Affairs says that more than 300,000 Venezuelan migrants have returned home since September 2020. The exodus from Venezuela. Estimated refugees and migrants in 2024, or the most recent year available. There are nearly 7.8 million Venezuelan refugees and migrants, up from 0.7 million in. How did Venezuela get here? A number of economic and political milestones mark Venezuela's path as a petrostate. Discovering oil. In 1922, Royal Dutch shell geologists at La Rosa, a field in the Maracaibo Basin, struck oil, which blew out at what was then an extraordinary rate of 100,000 barrels per day. In a matter of years, more than 100 foreign companies were producing oil, backed by dictator General Juan Vicente Gómez, 1908 to 1935. Annual production exploded during the 1920s. PDF from just over 1 million barrels to 137 million, making Venezuela second only to the United States in total output by 1929. By the time Gómez died in 1935, Dutch disease had settled in. The Venezuelan bolivar had ballooned, and oil shoved aside other sectors to account for over 90% of total exports. Reclaiming oil rents. By the 1930s, just 3 foreign companies, Gulf, Royal Dutch Shell, and Standard Oil, controlled 98% of the Venezuelan oil market. Gómez's successors sought to reform the oil sector to funnel funds into government coffers. The Hydrocarbons Law of 1943 was the first step in that direction, requiring foreign companies to give half of their oil profits to the state. Within 5 years, the government's income had increased 6-fold.